Okay. Well, thank you. So the next item is another information item, the fiscal year 2014-15 audit plan results. Larry and Bob, thank you.
So in accordance with our standards, our auditing standards, and with the Audit Services Charter, the committee is periodically appraised of the results of our audit work and the status of our audit plan, and it provides you in part to fulfill your oversight responsibilities and gives you visibility over Audit Services efforts and in completing our 14-15 audit plan. With regards to internal audits, there was 11 audits that were completed and 2 consulting projects that we have listed in the report. And a complete list of those internal audits are found on ARM 33, and a summary of each report has been provided to the committee as an attachment as well, attachment 2. And just to high-level summary of those for the committee, we were able to validate that CalSTRS has incorporated best practices in developing strong leadership development and succession plans along with workforce strategy plans. We were also able to validate the accuracy of transferring Pension 2 plan assets between TIA-CREF, our former custodian, and Voya Financial. And we had 2 audits that focused on managing third-party risk this last year. One was service organization oversight, and it focused on oversight of service providers who could impact our financial reporting, and also on third-party data provider oversight that focused on ensuring member data is secure and that we have appropriate oversight and contractual framework in place to protect members' valuable information. And we made 4 recommendations in that particular audit to improve our oversight of vendors that host CalSTRS data. It's particularly important that we have that in place as we move forward implementing the new pension solution. The review of anonymous reporting reviewed our processes for reporting unethical or illegal activities through our ethics hotline and pension abuse hotlines. And we also audited our disability benefit process to determine that disability benefits are authorized and processed accurately. You may have noted a finding in there where we need to ensure that benefits are calculated accurately using correct compensation periods. And finally, we audited our tax reporting and remittance processes to ensure that we have accurate and timely withholding and remittance of member and beneficiary taxes. In total, there was 12 recommendations in these reports that focused on strengthening internal controls, enhancing information security, and increasing operational efficiency, along with ensuring compliance. Management's response has been included in each of those findings, and we will continue to monitor implementation of those recommendations and report periodically to the committee. The 2 consulting projects that we concluded this last year, listed on ARM page 38, included providing management assurances over CalSTRS tax compliance and the accuracy of information included in CalSTRS sustainability report. The only audit report that we did not complete this last year that was included in the 14-15 plan is a review of the compliance and ethics program. That audit is substantially complete, and we're working with the legal office to finalize the report. If you have any questions about our internal audit activity, I'm happy to respond to any questions that you might have. Moving on to our employer audit program, I'm pleased to report that we completed 38 audits this last year, which exceeded our goal that we had in the audit plan of 34 audits. So in addition, the employer audits team participated in 183 GASB 67 audits this last year, and we also implemented new auditing procedures to enhance the employer audit process. So we have a listing of the internal audits that were completed on ARM pages 34 and 35. And additionally, there was 3 draft reports that were issued pending school district response. 7 of those reports that were identified on there through asterisks were identified as having systemic issues. And as we discussed earlier, those are reported to our program area, and we reach out to them and provide training on those issues along with the circular letter that we did. The most common audit findings this last year remain unreported post-retirement earnings, errors that were identified in reported to the defined benefit program rather than the defined benefit supplemental program, or the reporting of non-creditable compensation. We also found incorrectly reporting member earnings as non-members, and then incorrectly reporting sick leave and excess sick leave. Those remain to be our top issues. I discussed briefly some of the things that we're doing in response to that in our previous discussion. And I'd like to point out that on ARM 36, we have a couple of charts there. The thing that I felt that was interesting in that is noting that there was a downward trend in findings that were related to errors in reporting earnings to the defined benefit program this last year, which we thought was significant over the last few years. And then the lower chart on there shows that most of our audit findings continue to come from what we identify as high-risk school districts through our risk assessment process. And as you can see on there, when we do spend the time and go out and audit the low-risk districts, we're not really having any level of findings in those that are identified as low risk. And so we continue to focus on those areas that are high-risk entities as part of our risk assessment. And then we also saw a decrease in the number of audits that were appealed this past year. And in the last couple of years, we've been trending around 25 to 30%, and we had about an 18% rate this last year. We also performed other audit activities that are outlined in the attachment there on ARM 38, and we provide insight and advice or consulting services through participating in various steering committees, performing risk assessments, analyzing legislative proposals, and participating in the development of new regulations. And we also participated in the legal process for audit appeals. And then we promote professional development of our staff through providing in-house training. Those were the primary activities that were identified in the 14-15 plan. I believe that, as a result, we've had a successful year in concluding at least those audits that were in the plan, except for the one that I mentioned that is substantially complete, and exceeding our goal in the employer audit area. And then I think we also contribute a lot to the organization through these other audit activities. I also have in there in the attachment audit follow-up. And so when we issue these reports, we have audit findings that we continuously monitor with management, who's responsible for taking corrective actions. And typically we follow up in 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year periods there. And the attachment 2 contains our audit follow-up results and implementing recommendations that are over 6 months old and over 1 year old. There remain 10 open internal audit findings. 3 of them are over 1 year old, and we see an improvement from the last time that we reported to the committee where we had 18 findings that were over 1 year old. And so I think that reflects well on management's part as far as implementing those recommendations and resolving those issues that were pointed out previously in our audit reports. From employer side, we have 27 unresolved employer audit findings, and again, 18 just remaining. So at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have with regards to our report on our 14-15 plan. With that, we also conduct external audits or facilitate, I should say, external audits. And we recently contracted with KPMG LLP to complete an audit of our project management office. And as you may recall, we had in our 14-15 plan an audit on information technology management, and the full report is included in here as attachment 3, but we have some representatives here today from KPMG that I'd like to invite forward, Omer Chaudhry and also Matthew Benton, who will present the results of their review to the committee.
Welcome.
Good morning. I'm Matt Benson. I'm a managing director with KPMG and led the audit for the PMO.
Omer Chaudhry, I'm a director, and I was the lead supervising the engagement for this audit.
The objective of our audit was to look at the Information Technology Project Management Office and review whether they have the practices and controls in place to meet their mandated objectives around IT governance, IT strategic direction, their processes and practices, their capability, maturity, and adherence to documented processes, risk management, change management, vendor management, and a number of other project management disciplines. Our approach in the audit was to review the PMO's capabilities based on industry practices and standards, including those from the Project Management Institute, the Capability Maturity Model Integration, known as CMMI, the control objectives for information and related technologies, known as COBIT, and for the Information Technology Infrastructure Library, known as ITIL. We reviewed documents provided by the PMO in terms of what their methods were and what their practices were. We also interviewed a number of staff, and we also audited and reviewed a number of sample documents from projects that were existing within the last year. And out of that, we identified a number of observations and findings. I think we wanted to kind of just briefly share the overview of findings and not go into every detail, but certainly happy to answer any questions about the findings. Overall, I think that there's 3 high-level observations that we made. One is that the project management, IT project management functions are siloed between several different groups within CalSTRS, including the PMO, the Business Renew Program, the Information Technology Services Division, as well as the Business Direct Group. The second finding or observation we had was that the maturity level, their roles and responsibilities between those groups are all different and disparate. There's not a commonality amongst them. There's just significant differences between how they operate. The third is that there are overall opportunities that exist for CalSTRS to improve their portfolio, program, and project management related to information technology. And those things include such things as updating the PMO's mandates and objectives, clearly defining the roles and responsibilities between these various groups, updating the methods and practices and tools that the PMO uses, and essentially further maturing each of the project management disciplines that exist. We've reviewed our findings with the management team, and overall we seem to be in agreement around the findings as well as future direction. Management has already identified a number of activities which they're moving forward on and implementing, and they're also developing a roadmap for future implementations and future improvements.
Thank you. And if the committee has any questions with regards to that audit, thank you. And that concludes my report with regards to our activities this past year, and if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Don't see any questions from the committee members. Can I just ask one question? And Bob, I'm not sure if you have anything to say. You do? Go for it. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, you should probably go first.
No, because you'll make me sound smarter. Because
There's not much chance of that, but I thank you, Mr. Chair, nonetheless. So Larry, I just have a bunch of things, so I'll just come at them. One would be, it's become customary to call employer audits audits, but they're not really audits, right? They're more compliance reviews.
Reviews.
Yeah. So one suggestion might be the word audit has a specific meaning to those of us who are auditors, and it may be more accurate to start calling these what they really are, which is directed compliance reviews. Just a thought. Another is, with respect to the common finding types that you see on ARM 34 and 35, audits by their very nature are confrontational. You go in and you're looking through data, and they're necessary as well. But sometimes things go really well, and so I just wanted to highlight, if you look on ARM 34, lines 14 through 23, LAUSD, Los Angeles Unified School District, you can see that there were several compliance reviews that came away with no findings. Let's hear it for LA Unified, yoo-hoo. Yay. And then another couple would be line 33, Los Rios. Yay, Los Rios. And number 37, Hayward. So I think it's, the auditors are in there digging around like a dentist with a probe, and they'll find something if it's there. And so when they come away with nothing, wow, isn't that great? Maybe they should get like a letter or an email that says, geez, thanks a lot for your good work. All right, enough patting on the back.
However, if I could, in the spirit of true auditor here, one of the things that I'd like to point out to the committee on, particularly on LAUSD, that is a large district. There's 82 reporting units, 81 or 82 reporting units just for LAUSD. And as you know, we've had some significant resources dedicated to audit services. In the last year, the committee granted us additional resources to really look at making sure that we fully audit that. And this last year, we developed a new audit program and an approach to specifically for LAUSD, and we chose some of the reporting units to go out and test this program. And so as a result of that, we selected, and you'll notice on our area here, some of the lower risk reporting units that were identified. But we've now moved into the higher risk areas, and there will be some forthcoming types of issues. But in part, I think it's not only did we find some success in doing well in their reporting, I agree with that, but we will be looking at some of the higher risk areas within LAUSD this next year.
Thank you. So continuing on, I think, do you have I'm looking at ARM 36 now. You noted a decrease in over time. Do you have any readily available explanation as to why'd that go down, in your opinion?
You're talking about the errors in
graph.
reporting earnings in the DB
Yes, sir.
program? Yeah. That was going to be my question, so I don't have anything to ask. Yeah.
So, I don't have empirical evidence of this. We'd kind of just report the results, right? But I would like to think that it's for a couple of good reasons. One is that I think there's been a lot of emphasis in the organization on increasing awareness and educating the employers, and I think that has been very helpful because we do continue to focus on the high risk areas for the most part in our audit plan. So I think that we're seeing less errors. I believe because of the awareness of what is creditable compensation. There's been a lot of training and discussion about that, the need for development of the new regulations, which I think have been helpful as well in helping people understand the differences in what should be reported to the DB versus the DBS. And I think that I also in the past those audits were we haven't really seen a real increase in the number of audits that we performed. I mean, it's been fairly consistent over time, and so I would like to think it's because of the improved member education that's taking place.
Thank you. And then with respect to the bottom chart, I just want to make one thing clear. Although it does appear that the risk assessment is working in the sense that, we find larger findings in high risk and very little in the lower risk, which means that your risk assessment is working essentially. But these aren't necessarily weighted by the number of audits. So is it true to say that there are a larger number of higher risk audits, and this is just the aggregate dollar amount? So this doesn't necessarily show us that per audit, that the medium risk, the low risk, I'm with you, but the medium risk looks, right, we do fewer of those.
Yes.
So the findings per audit still might be. And my larger issue is, not an issue, it's just a point, which is we can use this to feed back into the risk assessment and say, is the risk assessment capturing the dimensions we want it to? Because this comes in front of the board, and the board has to vote on the risk, approve the audit plan and the risk assessment. And so this is an opportunity to sort of feed back into that and say, oh, well, there were some things that that really seem to be good at predicting these findings in the future. And so a feedback into the risk assessment, I think, would be important.
Yeah, I'd like to point out a change that occurred here too. And what you see in prior years where there's a large dollar amount of the high-risk findings, I don't think that the dollar amounts have really changed that much over time, although that's what it reflects here. Let me explain why. Is that prior to in 12, 13 and prior years, what would happen is the auditors, while they were out in the field and they noticed an issue, would start expanding their sample and their population to other members and really start auditing those accounts on site and include those as part of the audit report. Well, typically from an audit, when you have a sampling methodology and you identify an issue, you point out that what that issue is. And so when we say, hey, in our sample, and this has been a change in practice in the last couple of years here, when we identify, say, 5 members who have a reporting error, we ask the district to work with the program area and CRU to identify all affected members. And they submit a correction report, and those numbers are not reflected here.
It wouldn't show up.
Where previously they did, and it took us 600 or 800 hours to complete an audit because they went back and they did that member account auditing, if you will. We're auditing the reporting practices of the employer, and we don't really focus on the member account per se, although we do from a sample perspective, but we don't go back and audit each individual member's account. That's really kind of a program function, but when we notice a reporting systemic type of issue at the district, then we get them engaged, we get them working together, and then they resolve the total problem for reporting. So I think that's why we see a decrease in the recovery there for.
Right. It's just the way it's reported.
Yes.
Yeah. With respect to the internal audit findings, as chief auditor, you own those audits and you own the findings, and then management owns their response, of course. Could you comment on your comfort and agreement with management's responses to the internal audit findings that we'd find on ARM 40 and forward?
Let's see how I can best do this. As part of the audit process, when we issue a draft report, we have what we call an exit conference where we sit down with the program area and discuss each finding that's included in the report. And they have an opportunity at that time to either, one, provide us additional information. We discuss the recommendation and whether it's a cost-effective, efficient approach to resolving, taking corrective actions to resolve the issue there. And then we make our recommendation, and management prepares a response, which is included in the final audit report. We analyze that response, and we determine whether that response adequately addresses the issue or not. And if it doesn't, then we would have a subsequent discussion with management. And so that by the time we issue a final report, and the summaries of which you're seeing here, I'm comfortable with those responses that have been given, that if management carries out those actions or any other actions that they carry out that aren't listed on there, as long as it fully addresses the finding. And we determine that through our 3-month, 6-month, and 1-year follow-up activities to ensure that management is addressing those issues, and then we report that to the committee.
Thank you.
John?
So we were distinguishing between compliance reviews and audits. So can you give us the standards? Are they yellow book standards? Or what type of standards do we need to meet for the various audits?
Okay. For the internal audits, we use the standards issued by the Institute of Internal Auditor, and they issue those standards. And by law, if you have an internal audit department, they're commonly referred to as the Red Book standards, issued by the Institute of Internal Auditors. Those are the standards that we follow for our internal audits. There are a lot of management and administrative and procedural types of standards that we follow in conducting those types of audits. Now that differs from our employer audits that are really focused on compliance activities, right? We're not talking about operational efficiencies. We don't go out to the school district and fully evaluate their internal controls, right? We look at those that are just related to reporting of member data, not their full payroll office or anything like that. And so because it's more limited in scope and the nature of the audits is more strictly compliance oriented with law, we're not looking at, fraud risk assessments and full internal control evaluations and that's required under the standards that we do for all of our internal audits. And so that's I think the reason why you're mentioning here, in the audit industry, I mean, an audit is really about most commonly referred to as financial statement audits, right? And anything outside of that is really referred to as a consulting practice by AICPA standards. However, for internal audit standards, as long as we're following the Red Book, and we're not looking at governmental. I know the Controller's Treasurer's Office uses Yellow Book standards, and because we're not looking at governmental funds that way, and because of what the law requires, we use the Red Book standards.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think I don't see any other questions, so thank you very much on that item. So our next item is an action item, the Independent Auditor's Report for the restated fiscal year 2013-14 schedule of aggregate pension amounts, and Robin will present to us on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as a result of GASB 67 and 68, for the first time last October, CalSTRS issued 2 special purpose statements for use primarily by our employers in preparing their entries under GASB 68. And in order to allow the employers to use that information without needing to come back and audit our records, we asked our external auditor to issue an audit report against those special purpose schedules. So that was all done last fall. As a result of beginning to use those statements in this spring, so again in late spring of 2015, we identified a labeling problem with a number that we had presented on one of those 2 statements, the statement of aggregate pension amounts. The area that caused confusion was something that was labeled total pension expense. And the reason for the confusion was that our number included the effect of current year contributions, which according to GASB 68 needed to be not recognized on the employer side. So as a result of that potential confusion, we conversed with Crow. We had a lot of dialogue around what to do, how to handle that. And we came to the conclusion collaboratively that it would be better to replace that number with the beginning NPL for fiscal year 13-14, or the NPL at June 30th, 2013, to provide the ingredients for calculation that our employers would use. The reason that we took that approach is that any pension expense number we would provide would require adjustment by the employer. We can't do all of the adjusting, so it seems to be better for us to give clear ingredients to the employer calculation and let the employers do the calculation as is appropriate for their particular environment. And so what our action item is for you is to accept the restated schedule of aggregate pension amounts and the accompanying report from Crow. Crow did run this reporting process through their professional practices organization and concluded that we did not have a deficiency in internal control in this particular situation. So I am happy to answer any questions about the restatement or the process that led us to this restatement.
Any questions? Bob, can you come, because I know there were lots of conversations that went on, and Bob was very involved with them from the perspective of the committee and the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is amazing how many conversations and how much accountants can talk about something really small. Basically, it boils down to ARM 137, which is Schedule X. As originally issued, it had a total pension expense. And whenever you have a new large pension standard like 67 and 68, it's reasonable to expect some road bumps along the way. And of all the road bumps I could imagine hitting, this is a pretty small one. I concur with, I don't disagree with management's choice to not attempt to report a total pension expense, because even if you did that, it wouldn't give employers the information they needed specifically, because they'd still have to use information that they have down at their level and adjust that number. It seems more appropriate to present an NPL, or what I'll call a net pension liability, which is what you see at the top of Schedule X now. So I think management's approach is very reasonable. The auditor also felt it was a reasonable approach. And I think it's important to understand that this does not change at all the underlying financial statements of the organization. This is a special schedule. It does not affect those at all. It's just really related to a small issue that is really exciting for accountants and pointy heads like us. But it does matter, to the school districts, and it really does to employers. And so it is more accurate. It is more user-friendly. And I concur with management's change. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Irena?
I just wondered about the communication with the districts and how they will be responding or understanding what's happening.
Sure. So one of the things before we brought this to you was make sure that our education materials addressed this potential confusion. So as soon as we found out about the potential confusion by someone calling it to our attention in terms of their use of the data, we actually updated our education materials to walk through some examples as to how you would use the data as we had originally presented it vis-a-vis how it would be under this presentation. And we sent out snail mail, email, and web announcements to employers. We continue to get questions from employers about the implementation of GASB 68 using the information, and I welcome that dialogue. It hasn't been centered around this particular change, but just in terms of the kinds of entries they need to make and where they can find the information from us, and how that compares to information that they're getting from CalPERS, because remember, our employers are getting information from two sources to actually make their entries. So I feel comfortable that we have used a variety of communication channels to make sure people are aware of the information that we have available, how they could use it, and our willingness to continue to engage in dialogue with them if they have questions or concerns. And that seems to be working. So, thank you.
Any other questions? So I think we need a motion then to accept the restated financial statements. Can I hear a motion? Second? Great. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Great. Thank you very much on this. So item 8, the fiscal 2015-16 audit plan update. Larry?
Yes, in my last report, I talked about what happened last year, 14-15, and now I want to talk a little bit about going forward in our 15-16 plan. We presented that last time to the committee at the June meeting, and it was approved with the stipulation that we look at how to increase the number of employer audits that were in that plan. And so we have before you a revised plan that takes the number of employer audits from 27 to 45 audits, plus we'll be doing 5 what we call direct reporting audits, so a total of 50 employer audits. And what we did is we went back and we looked at opportunities of how we can increase those, and we found that really reallocating existing resources in the current year will give us the most benefit that would be expedient to see results. If we just applied additional resources, there's an onboarding process, takes 6 months to really start seeing good results. And so we thought, how can we be more expeditious about it? And so we had 4 different things that we did here. First of all, we transferred the responsibility for actually conducting the GASB audits from our employer audit program to Crow, our financial statement auditor. we will continue to participate in that. We'll work with facilitating those reviews, and we work with the school districts and have kind of the contact information there. And so we help Crow in facilitating that. We'll continue to do that, but that gives us a lot of additional resources that we can apply. As I said, we did, some 168 audits last year of that, and that's equivalent to about 12 or 15. So we say that it's going to increase our audits by 12 this next year. And then we worked with our legal office subsequently, and we're going to be shifting a lot of that workload of appeals to management. And so management will be the ones that will do the testifying rather than, as we had a discussion about at our last meeting, rather than the auditor who actually performed the work. And they will be the qualified subject matter experts on that. And then we're going to reduce our time allocated to special projects. And then we did take the suggestion from the committee, and we allocated one of our internal audit resources over to employer audits. And so we just subsequently happened to have a vacancy in the internal audit area. And so we reallocated that position. We've been able to hire, and actually the new staff started yesterday. And so on board right at the beginning of the year here, we moved swiftly on doing that, and it gave us some additional resources to apply as well. And while we won't see a large increase from that, as I said, there's a process for ramping up and things like that. But altogether, we believe that a combination of these efforts with no additional cost to the system, other than what's already been approved, we'll be able to add an additional 18 audits to our employer audit program. So I'm pleased to report that. The second thing that the committee asked that I look at is, with regards to our annual risk assessment and the number of audits that are performed in each category, and there's an adjustment that was made so that 70% of our audits will come from the high-risk category. So of those 45, 32 will be from the high-risk category, and 11 from our low risk, and then 11 from the medium risk, and then 5% or 2 from the low risk category. And so what that does is, at the current rate, the high-risk entities will be audited about every 10 years, puts them on a 10-year cycle with this adjustment that we're making here. And so consistent with our standards and requirements of the committee, we present the this revised audit plan for 15-16 for committee approval.
Anybody have questions? Bob, anything to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the moves that Mr. Jensen sort of pulled a rabbit out of a hat here. So the board asked him to increase the number of school district audits, and he found ways to do this via several approaches that I think were carefully done and gave careful thought to the when you do more of one thing and you don't add to the pot, you're going to do less of something else. So I think that will be a concern, which is, okay, what are we doing less of now? Where did that come from? And in my opinion, Mr. Jensen's done a really workmanlike effort here to come up with how can we increase these valuable audits while at the same time reducing the cost in other places. So I think it was very carefully done, and I congratulate him on this. I think this is really well done. With respect to the shifting on ARM 149, you can see a shift to more high-risk audits, which appears to be appropriate, especially given in light of what we saw on the other pages, where the higher risk audits do in fact seem to be the ones that have more findings. And the coverage rate of approximately 10%, it's 9.6. Thank you, my memory is going. Appears to be not unreasonable. In fact, it appears quite reasonable. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, I echo those comments that I think this was very responsive in a very excellent way to the changes that we wanted to see, and I think it was done in a very good way in terms of determining how to allocate the resources without affecting the effectiveness of whatever else we're doing. Joy.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo my appreciation for the reassessment that you did. I know it's challenging to try to address important issues given what can be constrained resources. So I just wanted to add my thanks to you and your team for taking a look at it.
Joy, then can I get a A motion from you, since you seem to be supportive? Great. And a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Larry. But don't go anywhere because the next item is you again. Chief Auditor's Report.
So now it's time to deliver that plan. And so already to date, we've completed 8 employer audits, and we have another 27 that are in progress. And so we're starting, we hit the ground running this year, and our challenge will be to deliver that plan that we just approved. And in our internal audit side, we've already kicked off a number of them with regards to authorized system access, looking at our financial area, accounts receivable, IT asset management, an operational review of our compensation review unit, and then we'll be concluding our ethics and compliance review, as I mentioned, and then continue to facilitate our financial statement audit that we'll be bringing back to the committee in November. In addition to that, we're facilitating another audit that I want to make sure that you're aware of. A couple of them. One is a private equity audit. We have an external auditor who's looking at the management and incentive fees for some of our private equity partnership arrangements and validating that those fees are calculated accurately and accounted for correctly on our records. And so that's I know an audit of interest that will be coming to the committee here shortly. And then secondly, we had the State Controller's Office in the last couple of months here conducting what they call a survey, actually, because it's not a full audit. They call it a survey, and it's a follow-up survey to a review that they did in 2011 with regards to our benefit payment processes. And so they're looking at the controls that we have in place for processing the benefit payments, putting them on the roll, submitting a claim schedule to the SCO for payment. And the objective of that is we're moving to a new, what they call a generalized claim system at the controller's office. And so they wanted to make sure that we had the right controls in place with regards to the processes that we use to make sure that the information gets to them accurately so that we're ensure that we're paying our member benefits correctly and accurately. And we had an exit conference with them yesterday. They had a couple of minor observations. They'll be issuing a final report here in the next 6 weeks or so that we'll share with the committee when we get that. Again, those observations were very minor. I know in the accounting area they've already made a simple, quick change, and so there was not any significant material items that were identified during their survey, which I think is a good sign over that most important area of processing, member benefits. And so, as I indicated, we're fully staffed now. We had 2 staff that started yesterday, Raymond Van and Gregory Pollock, and glad that they're here with us, and look forward to having them as part of our team. And then finally, on the committee's work plan, we have some RFPs that we're taking care of, and one of them is with regards to the committee consultant. And we've developed a statement of work on that, and the committee asked that I keep them appraised as we're making progress there. So we have the statement of work, we're processing the RFP, and we'll be issuing that on the street here shortly. Dr. Yetman's contract is set to expire in June of 2016, and we should have the RFP completed by then. And the work plan will be bringing it back to the committee at the February meeting. And then also we've put together a statement of work for our quality assurance review. This is kind of who audits the auditors, and it's an opportunity for an external audit firm to come in and take a look at our work and make sure that we're following our standards as we discussed previously. And we'll be bringing that back to the committee as well. Dr. Yetman asked that we keep him appraised of the progress that we're making there, and we'll share that with him, and then that's scheduled to come back to the committee at the February meeting as well.
Thank you. Any questions? Great, thank you. Review of information requests. Did we have any?
I didn't have any listed.
Okay, great, thank you. The draft agenda for the next committee meeting is, as you can see, it's mostly related to the delivery of the audits. Anybody have any questions or comments on it? Larry?
Just to avoid any confusion, there's a date on here of November 2nd, and that date is actually November 4th, is what we have scheduled. Just,
Okay.
we'll make an update to the agenda, but just make sure everybody's
Okay. Great,
clear on that.
great. And then finally, opportunity for statements from the public. I don't see any. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.